The air is thick, heavy with the smell of damp earth, sweat, and fear. Outside, the world screams. Artillery shells whistle and crack, tearing the sky apart. Machine guns chatter in a frantic metallic rhythm. Distant shouts in a foreign tongue get closer. Boots crunch on gravel. Here, inside the cave, the only sound is the ragged breathing of 30 women, their bodies pressed together in the dark. For them, the Japanese nurses and civilians trapped on the island of Saipan in 1944, the propaganda was a promise, a dark comfort. To be captured by the Americans was to face the unimaginable. They were beasts, demons with blonde hair and cruel eyes. The posters showed them grinning, holding bayonets, their shadows falling over broken families. The orders from home were clear. If capture is certain, you must choose Gyokusai, the shattered jewel, an honorable death over a life of shame. A bright light slices through the gloom, a flashlight beam. The women gasp, shrinking back against the cold stone. A silhouette appears at the mouth of the cave. It is the enemy. He is tall, but his shoulders are slumped with weariness. His rifle is held low, not aimed. His face is young, covered in grime, his eyes uncertain. He says something, his voice not a roar, but a quiet command. There is no honorable death here, only the primal, desperate need to live. One by one, with hands raised, they stumble out of the darkness. They blink in the blinding tropical sun, their hearts pounding a frantic rhythm against their ribs. They have failed their emperor, they have failed their nation. Now the punishment they were promised would begin. This unbelievable story unfolded thousands of miles from home. Let us know where you are watching from in the comments, and be sure to subscribe for more hidden histories. The first part of their new life is a cold ritual. They are lined up. A white powder, DDT, is sprayed over their bodies. It is a stinging chemical humiliation. A guard hands them rough cotton shifts to replace their torn uniforms. Every action is efficient, detached, impersonal. The women wait. They watch the guards' faces, searching for the cruelty they were taught to expect. But it does not come. Then they are led toward a large tent. A smell pours out, overwhelming their senses. It is not the smell of death or decay. It is the smell of hot food. Steam rises from huge metal vats. Inside, men in white aprons move with a steady rhythm, scooping food onto metal trays. A tray is pressed into the hands of a young nurse. Let us call her Akiko. She represents them all. She braces herself for what she will see. Spoiled scraps. Leftovers fit for animals. The final insult. Instead, she looks down, and her mind refuses to understand. A mound of fluffy white rice sits glistening under the tent lights, more rice than she has seen in a month. Beside it, a ladle of thick, savory stew, rich with chunks of meat and carrots. There is a piece of soft, white bread, impossibly light, and a small paper cup filled with milk. This is a dream, or a nightmare. It must be a trick, a final cruel joke before the torture begins. She looks at the other women. Their eyes are wide with the same silent question. An older nurse begins to weep, her shoulders shaking, not from sorrow, from a profound, world-shattering confusion. Akiko watches a guard. He simply nods, gesturing for her to move down the line. Slowly, she lifts a spoon of the stew to her lips. The warmth spreads through her chest. The meat is real. It is salty and rich. She takes a bite of the bread. It is soft, yielding, a texture from a forgotten life. She eats, and with every single bite, the world she was taught to believe in begins to dissolve. The propaganda, the honor, the sacrifice. It all fades against the simple, undeniable reality of this meal. The demons were feeding her. But why? The daily ritual began to feel strangely normal, a terrifying normality. 3 times a day, the clang of the ladle against the metal tray. 3 times a day, a meal that would have been a feast in Tokyo. The women's bodies responded before their minds could. The hollows in their cheeks began to fill. The haunted, starved look in their eyes was slowly replaced by a quiet, watchful confusion. Their physical health was returning, but their souls were being hollowed out by a new kind of hunger, guilt. It arrived in unfamiliar forms. One day, a thick, brown paste was served on a cracker. The women eyed it with suspicion. It was sticky, clinging to the roof of the mouth. The taste was an explosion of salt and a deep, roasted sweetness. Nothing in their experience had prepared them for it. The Americans called it peanut butter. It was a food of pure abundance, made from a simple legume ground into a rich, caloric spread. It felt impossibly decadent. Other alien tastes followed. A dark, bubbling liquid in a strangely shaped glass bottle. Coca-Cola. The fizz was a tiny, sharp shock on the tongue. The sweetness was overwhelming. They saw the young guards drinking it constantly, a casual luxury that spoke volumes. It was a symbol. Back home, a Japanese civilian's daily ration had shrunk to less than 1,500 calories, mostly watery soup, a bit of rice, and pickled vegetables. Here, in an enemy prison camp, the women were consuming over 2,000 calories a day, a fact later confirmed by International Red Cross reports, which noted the American adherence to Geneva Convention dietary standards with a kind of detached surprise. They were prisoners of war, yet they ate better than the free citizens of the empire they were meant to die for. The irony was a physical weight in their stomachs. If this hidden side of history is surprising you, take a moment to subscribe. The story only gets more complex from here. The education continued beyond the mess tent. From a guard's radio, a strange music would sometimes drift across the camp. It was wild, syncopated, full of brassy confidence. Jazz. It was the sound of a world that did not know fear or scarcity. In the evenings, off-duty soldiers would play a game with a bat and a ball. They would shout and laugh with a casual freedom that was both enviable and infuriating. These were not the silent, grim warriors of Japanese propaganda. They were loud, they were informal, they were bafflingly human. One afternoon, a guard offered Akiko a small, wrapped bar. He mimed for her to eat it. Chocolate. She had not tasted it in years. It melted on her tongue, a wave of rich, sweet energy. She looked at the soldier. He was a boy, barely 20, his face tired and homesick. He just shrugged and walked away. The act was so simple, so devoid of malice. It was more disarming than any threat could have been. Her own government had demanded her death. This foreign boy had just given her a piece of chocolate because she looked tired. The world was turning upside down. Loyalty was a simple concept when your enemy was a monster. But what did loyalty mean when the monster fed you, gave you vitamins, and worried about your health? What was honor when your own people were starving while you grew stronger in captivity? Every meal was a betrayal. Every bite was a small act of treason against the memory of their starving families, against the soldiers dying on other islands with nothing but a ball of rice in their stomachs. The food that was saving their bodies was destroying their identities. Letters began to arrive, heavily censored, but still carrying ghosts of the truth from home. They spoke of food shortages, of cities turned to ash, of a growing desperation. The orderly, predictable world of the prison camp, with its 3 daily meals and its clean cotton shifts, began to feel like a sanctuary. The rules and regulations of the American military, which at first seemed like a tool of oppression, now felt like a shield. There was a strange dignity in this captivity. It was impersonal, yes, but it was not chaotic. Their basic human needs were met. Here, they were prisoners. But they were alive, and they were fed. Back home, they would be free. But they would be free to starve in the ruins of a shattered empire. The fear of the enemy was gone, replaced by a new and terrifying dread. The fear of going home. The physical nourishment was a prelude. The next phase was an assault on the mind. The Americans began a re-education program, not with threats, but with a projector and a canvas screen. The women were gathered in a large tent one evening. The air was still and humid. The projector whirred to life, its beam cutting through the darkness. They expected American propaganda, films of smiling families and towering cities. Instead, the images were horrifyingly familiar. They were Japanese newsreels, captured from other islands. But these were not the sanitized versions shown at home. They were the raw, uncensored reels. They showed Japanese soldiers, their own countrymen, committing acts of brutality in China and the Philippines. The women watched in stunned silence. The heroes of the empire, the men their brothers and fathers aspired to be, were shown as monsters. The silence in the tent was heavier than any scream. The next day, a different lesson. An American officer stood before them with a translator and a chalkboard. He did not speak of morality or ideology. He spoke of numbers. On one side of the board, he wrote Japan's annual steel production in 1943. On the other, he wrote America's. The difference was a chasm. He wrote down aircraft production, tank production, oil refinery capacity. The numbers were cold, relentless, and absolute. The war, he explained without emotion, was not a contest of spirit. It was a contest of factories, and it had been lost before it truly began. This was a new kind of warfare, one that did not target the body but the very soul of their identity. The belief in Japan's divine destiny, in the purity of its cause, was being systematically dismantled by undeniable facts. If you find this strategy as chilling as it is brilliant, please hit that like button and subscribe. The truth they were about to face would get even more personal. Then came the letters from home, small slips of paper that had crossed an ocean of war. The black ink of the American censors blotted out entire sentences, leaving behind a ghost of a message. But the truth was in the spaces between the words. A mother's letter to her daughter mentioned that the neighbor's house was gone. Another spoke of the meager winter rations. The stories were of hunger, of cities turned to ash, of a nation slowly bleeding to death. The contrast was a form of torture. The women would read these letters in the bright sunshine of Saipan, their stomachs full of bread and stew, their bodies strengthened by vitamins. The food that kept them alive was now a source of unbearable shame. Every meal felt like a betrayal. Every night they dreamed of their starving families. The psychological dam began to break. The quiet order of the camp was punctuated by sudden bursts of hysteria. One woman would be found weeping uncontrollably in the latrine. Another would simply stare into space for hours, her food untouched. The despair was a contagion. Suicide attempts became a quiet, desperate reality. Not with the theatrical honor of Gyokusai, but with the quiet shame of survival. Nurses like Akiko found themselves on a new front line, watching their friends, trying to stop them from swallowing sharp objects or trying to drown themselves in the shallows of the ocean at night. This was the ultimate dilemma. The propaganda had collapsed. The numbers proved the war was futile. The letters confirmed their families were suffering more than they were. What was honor now? Was it to die for a lie? To join their ancestors in service to a shattered ideal? Or was there a different kind of strength? The strength to endure this shame. The dignity to survive. Not as a soldier of the empire, but simply as a human being who had been given a chance to live. This internal war was reaching its climax when a new sound filled the camp. The American guards were gathered around a radio, their faces a mixture of awe and gravity. The news spread through the prisoners in hushed, terrified whispers. A new kind of weapon. A single bomb that had erased an entire city. Then another. The names were alien. Hiroshima. Nagasaki. And then, the most impossible rumor of all. The emperor, their living god, was going to speak to the nation. For the first time in history, his voice would be heard by commoners. His words would determine if their world would end in fire, or in a silence more profound than any of them could imagine. The war did not end with a bang. It ended with the crackle of a radio going silent. In the void that followed the emperor's voice, there was only the sound of the wind, and the quiet, ragged weeping of women who had lost everything. Their nation. Their God. Their purpose. They were no longer soldiers of the empire. They were simply survivors, adrift in a world they no longer recognized. The journey home was a strange, silent purgatory. They sailed on an American transport ship, crossing the same ocean that had once separated them from their enemy. Now that enemy was their keeper, their chauffeur. The women were healthy. Their skin had color, their eyes were clear, they had gained weight. They carried their physical well-being like a secret wound, a mark of shame they would have to hide. They watched the American sailors laughing and playing cards, and felt a distance greater than any ocean. As the coast of Japan appeared on the horizon, a collective gasp went through the women. It was not the green and vibrant homeland of their memories. It was a ghost. The cities were skeletal, dark smudges of ruin against the sky. When they docked, the smell hit them first. Not the smell of salt and sea, but of ash, decay, and a profound collective sorrow. The people who met them at the docks were thin, their faces etched with a hunger the women could no longer truly comprehend. Their own families looked at them with a mixture of relief and a quiet, unspoken accusation. You are alive. You are healthy. Why? Their stories were impossible to tell. How could you explain the taste of chocolate to a brother who had survived on boiled weeds? How could you describe a warm loaf of bread to a mother who had watched her neighbors starve? To speak of the enemy's kindness would be the ultimate betrayal. To admit they were treated with a detached, bureaucratic decency was an insult to the millions who had suffered and died, and so they chose silence. Their experience in the camp, the meals, the vitamins, the peanut butter, became a secret, a private, indigestible truth that they carried alone. They had been trained to expect monsters and were met with men. They had been prepared for death and were given life. They had been taught that honor was found in sacrifice, only to learn that survival came with a full stomach. The most potent weapon in the American arsenal was never the B-29 or the atomic bomb. It was the full-calorie diet. The Americans had conquered their bodies on the battlefield, but they conquered their souls in the mess tent. The greatest, most enduring shock of the war was not the enemy's cruelty, but their calculated, impersonal, and world-shattering mercy. If this story of psychological survival has moved you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more histories that are hidden in plain sight. Let us know in the comments what part of this experience you found the most unbelievable.